This is a Vanilla Palm Films production.
It's Monday, December 16th. Our video camera is sitting in a national cemetery. I just helped bury my father-in-law. I'm wearing one of his jackets. You know, death is the one thing that really grabs our attention. Now, a lot of people react to it differently, but there's one thing that I think we all have in common. It's the one thing that will definitely make us reflect, which I think is a positive thing, because without reflection, we do not grow. We do not learn. We do not appreciate. He was a Navy veteran, and I was on my way to see him to say goodbye when he passed, so I did not make it in time. Life really has a way of showing you who's in charge. It's a humbling experience. The rain is starting to fall now. But each time I go through a funeral, and I've lost a lot of loved ones in my life. Aside from both of my parents, there were 6 kids, and there's only 3 of us left now. So, and even each one of those deaths affected me differently. My father, we were expecting it. I had time to say my piece. My mother's death brought me to my knees, changed my life. And yet it was one of my sisters passing that really devastated me. I remember being outraged at everything and everybody. Now there's a complex set of issues, of course, as to why that happens. But it took me back during my father-in-law's funeral a week ago. It's surreal that family members don't really know how to act. I guess part of it is being in shock, and you don't know what to do, and you're in unfamiliar territory most of the time. I guess really people are just grasping for some kind of sense of normalcy. But it struck me again at the wake before the graveside ceremony. I stood behind my mother-in-law as his family and friends and acquaintances and other family members came by to pay their last respects. Most were caught in an awkward situation. They wanted to glance at his open casket, but then their eyes connect with his widow or his son or his daughter, and of course they're compelled to say something. And I find it to be the weirdest comments that will come out of people's mouths. Now, granted, most people want to tell you they're sorry, but for me, I always found those words very shallow. Like, how are you doing? Seriously? How do you think we're doing? I know that sounds cruel and mean, but just hear me out for a second. Think about it. There were a few people who would issue those words and then immediately think, what am I doing asking you how you're doing? I don't know. I'm just sorry. Of course, you're not doing well. You just lost a loved one. And then there were people that immediately launched into one of their own stories that had nothing to do with him or the situation. One even talked about her travels across country as a truck driver. I do believe in God. I don't know if I consider myself an extremely religious man, but I have my own deal with God and religion, and I'm a believer. But we also live in the South, and it's a place that throws out prayer and religion as if it were necessary. I guess everyone needs something to believe in. I have nothing against that. But when you're really hurt, again, this is just me. You may have a completely different take on this. But to have a complete stranger say to you, we're praying for you. Really? Do you really mean that? Are you going to bed at night and saying, God, I'd like to say a special prayer for so-and-so, so-and-so. I kind of doubt it. Or what would you know to pray for me? How do you know what the circumstances are? How do you know what was going on? Or he's better off now. Really? I don't know that. We're mad. We're angry. Are we going to justify? I was mad as hell. No one wants to die. I don't believe that. I believe it is the one characteristic within our souls that never wants to give up. So to say, well, he's better off, or I hope he didn't suffer long, I just find that offensive. Now, maybe it's a case of no one really knowing what to say. But once in a while, and I've always found it to be true, that at least one person will walk up and say something catches you off guard. And there was this one gentleman, a friend of his. He didn't know who I was. Probably assumed I was the son, since I was standing behind his wife, my mother-in-law. But he walked straight up to me and he said, "You know, I never saw this guy work a day in his life." But he didn't mean it disrespectfully. He just told the truth. And that actually relieved me more than any other comment I heard that day. And then he launched into a story about how different Keith Wood was. And I knew right away that he was telling the truth. And I appreciated that. It was a real, sincere observation. And he stuck around to talk. He was curious to know whether my experiences with him were similar. I haven't made my mind up about death and what happens to me when I go. I used to not even consider cremation. It just seemed a horrible way to go. Of course, you're already dead at that point. And then I started to understand two things. The expenses involved in a traditional funeral. It truly is highway robbery. It is a major expense on more than one family who can't always afford it. Now, luckily, my in-laws made prearrangements. But what if they hadn't? $8,000 for a very, very basic, simple funeral. I've had cars that cost less than that I drove for 10 years. Cremation does offer a way to keep some of us around, at least in theory. It's a way to hang on to a loved one. So I am considering it. Truth of the matter is, I always admired Charles Lindbergh's way of going out. He was buried within 3 hours when he died. There wasn't time for the press to get there. No need for embalming. Just roll you up in a sheet, put you in the ground. Seems pretty simple. We've overcomplicated the process. Comes to find out, you can't even just be buried somewhere in a hole. We've boxed ourselves into all these laws and regulations to where they force you to play by their rules. Then you make your way to the gravesite and you look down and it's just a simple hole. Doesn't get much simpler than that. $4,000 casket going into a muddy hole. It really doesn't even make good common sense. But we do it out of respect, and I think the funeral business plays off of that emotion. And in the South, there's the preacher who cannot resist turning the funeral into a "you better save yourself" speech. It's kind of funny. The person you're there for is already gone. They did what they were going to do. So let's scare the other folks into misunderstanding what this departure is all about anyway. Because it's really about what you do while you're alive. So Keith, if you're listening, for me anyway, you accomplished the one thing that you wanted to do. And that's be remembered. That's for sure.